Good morning, everyone. We are going to get started here in just a second. I'm going to just wait one more minute to get more folks in. And if you hear some background noises while I am doing announcements, it's because my dogs are trying to break into my office because I had kicked them out. All right, so good morning. Welcome to Earth Week. This is a series of events brought to you by the Naturally Network. I'm Katrina Tolentino, Executive Director at Naturally Austin, one of the network's 8 chapter cities. And today's Earth Week event is all about how your business can start the carbon neutral journey. We've brought together an exciting group, but before we get started, I just want to go over a couple of housekeeping items. If you have any questions as the panel runs, please drop those in the chat and we'll flag them for our moderator. The way that the event is going to flow, I'll kick it off to Jeremiah, our moderator, here in just a second. We'll do intros, and then we'll do some storytelling and talk about how our brands featured today have taken on the carbon neutral journey. So I'll go ahead and introduce Jeremiah Mcelwee, Chief Merchandising Officer at Thrive Market and Naturally Austin board member. Thank you so much for moderating today, Jeremiah, and take it away.
Thank you so much, Karen, and welcome everyone. Super fun to be doing this panel. And I know that in talking to many of our members and many of the members of the community, this is always the biggest question. It's like, I love the idea of carbon positive or carbon neutral, but how do I get started? Where do we begin? Where do we even, there's so much going on. And as you all know, sometimes just keeping your business running, keeping the lights on is challenging enough, let alone diving in and pushing forward into deeper levels of sustainability and environmental missions. So super grateful to have an esteemed panel here with us of amazing leaders from brands that are doing the work and pulling back the veil a little bit to give you all insight as to how they got started, where they're at in the journey, and then just some interesting topics that'll come out of their introduction. So first off, as Katrina said, I'm the Chief Merchandising Officer for Thrive Market, and we are on our own journey towards climate positivity. And if you haven't yet, I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about us here, but if you haven't yet, please check out our Mission Impact Report, which we just published online. We view it through 3 primary lenses of expanding access, meaning giving our members access to healthier products; ethical sourcing, just meaning we take care of people and planet throughout our supply chains; and then finally, environmental responsibility and really limiting the impact that we're taking in and then delivering to our members. And fortunately, we're a retailer, so we are privileged enough to work with these 3 brands that are here today: All Good, Tea, and Alter Eco. So without further ado, let's dive in. And really, as we were preparing for this panel, we had some really amazing conversations, and it became clear to me that the biggest thing we can do, or the most important thing we can do, is let each of these 3 folks tell their story. So we have Caroline Duell from All Good, who's the CEO. We have Jane Frank, who's the VP of Sustainability and Environmental Responsibility at Tea. And then we have the CEO of Alter Eco joining us from Death Valley, Mike Forbes. So we'll kick it off and just let Caroline, I'd love for you to jump in and tell the story of All Good and how you all got started and where you're at in the journey. And I think when we were talking prior to this, it was fascinating because I know you have a diverse background of SKUs and a lot of different inputs, and figuring that all out has been a challenge. So I'll yield the floor to you, and please tell us your story.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's an honor and privilege to be here, and especially with such wonderful people who I admire and consider really good friends, and really nice to meet you, Jeremiah. So thank you so much for inviting me to be here. So yeah, All Good makes premium organic body care products and reef-friendly sunscreens, and we're based in Morro Bay, California, on the Central Coast. We've been in business for about 15 years, and yeah, I think as I was reflecting after our last conversation, one of the interesting pieces that came out for me was that from the very beginning of this business, which I started as a hobby, never wanted it to be a business, the idea of the impact that it would have was just primary to the concept of even starting a business. I really hesitated at the potential of scaling because I didn't want to have a negative impact. Our first product, which is still one of our most important products, is called All Good Goop, and it's a healing salve. So that was our very first SKU in the early days. That the company officially started in 2006, but All Good Goop was a recipe that I had already been making as a hobby for about 8 years. And when I first started making that product, it has the recipe hasn't changed. So it has 9 ingredients. 8 of those ingredients I was sourcing within 10 miles of where I lived. And even the packaging, we're up in West Marin living on a farm. So it was herbs I got from the farm. It was olive oil from a neighboring farm. It was vitamin E from Spectrum, which was at that time based in Santa Rosa. And then lavender essential oil was the only one. And I would import that from France. It was the only thing that we couldn't get locally and be able to really sort of sustainably put in our product from a local source. Even the jars, I would drive to Sacramento to a jar maker and get the jars. So our footprint at that time was literally however much I would drive my little biodiesel Jetta to get, which was pretty not that much output at that point, to go get the jars. And then we were selling them to just about a dozen retailers, and they were all within 200 miles. So at that point, I started getting nervous. When the kind of very onset of the company, we joined 1% for the Planet, because I was like, I got to have fiscal responsibility for everything that we can give back for any potential negativity in this. And the carbon side of it was just obvious. It was like we were on a farm. Any excess, any waste from the production, we would put right back into the soil. And it was this completely self-regenerating thing. So that was one SKU. And now we have 50 SKUs with 122 ingredients from 30 different countries being sold at 5,000 different distribution points across the globe. So I think the analogy for me is like, at first I had a dandelion, and then that dandelion turned into the bulb with all the seeds, and then it's just like this, and I'm like out there in the air trying to catch it, right? As this business has evolved and grown. So for us, what was really important along the way was to capture and understand the impact as we've scaled and as we've grown. And so that analogy of the seed spreading, and like you said, keeping the lights on, there have been times when I have personally felt further away from the process, further away from understanding the impact that the business is having from a carbon perspective. So we've actually finally gotten to a point where we've been able to reel it back in. And what I mean by that is to be able to measure. I think that's going to be a really important point for all of the listeners, is that the first step is measuring. In those early days, it was so easy to measure, right? Oh, I drove 50 miles today. Well, and then I would just make a little mark and say, that had this much potential impact. And I'd go really try to sequester by throwing some more mulch on our fruit trees. And it's like that simple. But now there's so much complexity to it. And there's so many different angles from which one needs to understand the impact, right? So go back to measuring. So what we recognized was that we had blown these seeds all out over the place, and we needed to kind of understand what the impacts were. So our first step, and I know Jane will speak to this too, but our first step was to do a full supply network assessment. And we partnered with Terragenesis International, TGI. I'll give them a plug. They're amazing, amazing partners in the space. And they did a full analysis of every single source of every raw ingredient, how it travels, and then the relationship to our co-packers. So that's the second point I want to make after measurement, is that our business model has now grown to where we have 7 different co-manufacturers. And one of them is ourselves. That's really easy to measure. But the other 6 have varying levels of transparency relative to where they get their raw ingredients, how they're processing the materials within their plant, where they're getting their power, and on and on and on. So that was really helpful to have that supply network assessment. After that, in 2019, we actually went for the full carbon neutrality. We were able to achieve it in 2020, completing our measurement of all 2019 greenhouse gas emissions, scope 1, 2, and 3. And then anything that we were not able to reduce within our own system or inset, we developed offsets. And our choice for offsetting is literally, the idea of it is taking responsibility for the emissions that you inherently are going to not be able to prevent, and then basically sequestering that carbon somewhere to create the offset, right, of the balance of where emissions have occurred. And so for us, we chose 2 offset partners, both domestic, because we wanted to be as local as possible. And we divided them between our shipping emissions, everything that it takes a product to go to a customer, to be shipped out to a customer. We offset by replanting trees in Northern California, which was pretty poignant after some serious forest fires. So we're sinking the carbon in Northern California for shipping products. And then our second partner is called Southern Plains Land Trust, and they're in Eastern Colorado. And their project is sequestering carbon through native grasslands and protecting and restoring native grasslands in Eastern Colorado. So that's our offset program for 2019 that we just finished in 2020. Now we're in the process of, we've just completed our calculations for 2020, and we're working on our continued ongoing reduction and offset plans as we move forward. I'm going to stop there because I could probably just kind of take the whole show, and I won't. And I would love to get more into any of those pieces, talk about offsets and some interesting stories, particularly in the importance of measurement. Once again, really surfaces the reality of where your impact is, because there are a lot of easy assumptions to make. And once you measure it, then you learn what's actually going on. So we can talk about that too. Thank you.
I love it. Thank you so much. And I definitely want to come back to that offset question. So we'll come back to that in a little bit after we finish up the intros. But Jane, I'd love to turn the floor over to you. I know, as you know, I've been a huge NUMMI fan for as long as I can remember, and just so incredible to watch the work Ahmed and the whole team have done with the company over the years. But as we were talking prior to the panel, it was really a good reminder for me of how unique your sourcing is and how unique the ingredients y'all are bringing from around the world are, and your approach to climate neutrality and where you're going with that. So please tell us your story and tell us some of those challenges.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremiah, and Caroline, thanks so much. That was so interesting to hear about your journey as well, and the origins of the goop, which I have in my closet at all times and take with me on all camping trips. So that's beautiful. So yeah, we've been offsetting since, I think we started in 2011, and we started with our shipping emissions, and we started with a company called Carbon Fund. Since then, we've really, tried to figure out how to better kind of wrap our arms around our climate impact. I think starting with shipping was one of the easiest things to do. That's one of the easiest things to measure. But I think we really revisited it in earnest beginning in like 2016, 2017. And decided at that point it was really time to have a more comprehensive climate strategy that aligns with international goals. I think recognizing that we as a business sit within an ecosystem of private sector businesses, and we also sit within a society, right? And that society has to have goals, and where do we sit within that vis-a-vis Paris and all of our collective interests. So in 2016, 2017, we decided to do a full inventory and footprinting similar to All Good. We started with we started actually with a supplier survey. We've been sourcing, this probably about 60% of our agricultural products comes from 7 different origins in 5 different countries. So that's like our big 5, which is like China, India, Madagascar, Egypt, and South Africa. And so, we knew that was primarily where our agricultural supply was coming from, but there are lots of other ingredients that we source. We're sourcing over 130 ingredients from 32 different countries. And we didn't always know, where exactly is the cinnamon coming from? And are we buying more cinnamon or more allspice? How do these other ingredients kind of fall out? And because, we have the benefit of long-term, really direct sourcing relationships in our supply chain, we were able to, to go to our primary suppliers and, gather the information we needed all the way down to the farm level for all 130 of our ingredients to really understand where they were coming from, where we had overlap in our supply chain. And what our supply chain even looked like, how many smallholders were there, how many large farms were there, what other certifications were present. At the time, we have a water campaign, so we also used it as a way to understand a little bit more of what was going on with water access in our supply chain. So with that data, which was super interesting, and it was a worthy project in and of itself, we constructed a subset, which was 11 of our ingredients that comprised about 84% of our purchasing. And we worked with Soil and More International, which is also like a totally awesome partner. They do a lot of work on the ground, particularly in teas and botanicals, and they're based in Europe. And so we worked with them on the full kind of supply chain assessment for our GHG emissions. So they took those top 11 ingredients, and then we had a really detailed survey that we used then and targeted at those, those top 11 ingredients that were 80+% of our purchasing. We used, in some cases, we used organic auditors. We had them collect the farm level data. It was really detailed. It was, farm practices, fertilization rates. Of course, we're organic, so it was compost. What kind of compost? How is it processed? It was, energy intensity of the processing equipment on the farm, and then transport within the country. So really mapping out all these pieces in a really in-depth way. And one of the big ahas that we had from that, getting back to Caroline's point around the importance of measuring and how it can, kind of test your assumptions and really give you what you need to make concrete and meaningful action. We being based on agricultural products, we assumed, okay, well, our emissions are going to be coming from agriculture. But in fact, and when we learned this, it was a bit of like, oh, of course, because we're sourcing organic tea, and tea is a perennial. So you plant your tea trees and you can leave them in the ground for up to 60 years before you have to renew that plantation. And there's often shade trees interspersed with tea in both China and India. This is organic cultivation. So we're not using herbicides or, agrochemicals, and the mulching that's done on the tea trees is left in the soil. So, we realized, which was a beautiful realization, that actually, and in fact, the farms were carbon positive. So they're sequestering already just by virtue of that, the product, the tea, and the way that it's farmed, which, was like, wow, that's amazing, right? So that was a lovely realization, but, within that realization is also the realization of like, oh, wow, the emissions are actually coming from the processing equipment, which is a much thornier issue to work with, right? Because then you're talking about, a renewable energy system for a tea plantation, that might cost you $200,000 in a country where they may not have access to technology. And, you can't just plug into the grid because of local regulations and that prohibit, that kind of, grid integration. So that was really, it's kind of, it's been something we're still, I think, working on. But totally illuminating, right? And helps us also to figure out where do we need to put our attention now. So that has opened up conversations with our co-packers around like, how can we more quickly help you like transition from this charcoal or diesel generator for this processing equipment to something that's, more energy efficient. We've supported like getting some of the woks that are used for firing the green tea transferred over to electricity. So really opening these conversations and supporting opportunities to increase the efficiency, like, in the places where it's most needed. And then we also kind of took that whole, universe of data, understanding now where our impacts are. We had some assumptions about insetting and some real like aspirational ideas about that, but we did the research on it. We we sent agronomists out to the farms to actually like test our assumptions around insetting, and found that because these practices were so robust, there wasn't that much additionality that was available to us to actually do insetting in our supply chain, which again is a really important piece of information for how we move forward effectively and efficiently to ensure that our actions are like most aligned with what's most meaningful for our climate and our planet right now, because really like there's no time to waste, and we all need to make sure that the actions we're taking are truly having a meaningful science-based impact. So our reductions have been focused on our packaging. One of the big like ahas this year was our corrugate. So similar to All Good, I'll kind of back up a little bit. We have measured that whole amount. We have reduction plans, where last year was the first year that we implemented reduction plans. This year we've gone through the measuring cycle again. One of our big ahas this year was that our corrugate has just like, that impact has exploded. We thought we were getting a higher recycled content in our corrugate than we're actually getting from our supplier. And so we realized that our corrugate is like 900 tons of emissions. So that's our key focus right now. We're laser focused on increasing the recycled content on our corrugate. And that's a meaningful action that can really bring down our emissions. But again, like we can't do it all within our supply chain. So we have a reduction plan within our supply chain to reduce source emissions where we can, where we're able to right now. And then the rest we're offsetting also. So we shifted our offsets about 2 years ago. We shifted them to the Amazon. We had been supporting some micro hydro in India and some renewable projects in China because those were close to our origins. We reevaluated that, and in light of the just intense vulnerability of the Amazon basin right now, and out of respect for that ecosystem, we shifted all of our offsets there. Given that we're a very international company, that made sense for us. So we're now supporting a project there it was previously land that is owned by a cattle and farming company, and they've chosen to preserve it as standing rainforest and support the local community. And they're even in process of transitioning land rights over to that local community. So that's kind of our story, and yeah, I'll pass the mic now.
That's amazing. That's just incredible, the work that y'all have done. And likewise at Thrive, we're in the same boat in terms of supporting the Amazon. And that's where we're doubling down in 2021 and beyond, just preserving the delicate tropical rainforest that we all need, the lungs. I call it the lungs of the planet, really. So amazing, both of you, incredible stories. Mike, I wanted to get you involved here. And for those of you, how would you be aware? You're not aware, but Mike's, that isn't just a fancy background. He is actually in Death Valley right now. So many of us have backgrounds that, where are you in the world? Not really, I'm in my office. He's actually in Death Valley. So thanks for taking time out of your vacation to talk about this important topic. And Alter Eco's always been on the bleeding edge of innovation, and I could sit here and talk about conversations I had at Expo West many years ago with Matthew and Edward, and just always on the forefront. And but we talked in a lot of detail here, and want to hear your story. As we were talking prior to this call, though, I found your origin story, or the origin story of Alter Eco, and how you guys got started with your tracking carbon, to be really personally amusing, and hope you'll share that as part of the story that you tell next.
Cool. Awesome. Super great to see everyone today. I'm using copious amounts of All Good every day down here. So thank you, Carolyn, for that. Yeah, I'd love to go through our journey. And I kind of think about it in 3 eras. And for those of you, hopefully there'll be some kind of nuggets for folks who are just getting started and things you can do. And for those of you who are further along the journey, love to reach out afterwards and partner with you and work on some of the projects that we're doing now. So era 1, I call kind of Google spreadsheets and elbow grease, and really think way back in time to January 2009. Obama was getting inaugurated. Like hope and change were kind of the key themes out there. Alter Eco was just a little baby company, maybe 6 employees, and a couple of them were interns. But we had this crazy idea that we wanted to do a full carbon audit. And we've done it every year since. And when we got started, it really was a completely cross-functional effort. We didn't have a VP of sustainability or anything like that. A lot of this was really new to the industry and certainly to us. And so we figured out, what's the best guess we can make at everything? And I'll give you a couple of examples. Flights. Okay, here's a Google spreadsheet. Here's a spreadsheet. Everyone just put in every flight you took for work in 2009 as it was, or how you got to work. Shipping, right? We can figure out where our big to from routes are and use some assumptions on how much fuel it would take to get there. We built that up in a 60-tab spreadsheet to get our best guess of what our carbon imprint was. And we sent out a sustainability report in 2009. It was 490 tons of CO2. That was our best estimate. And what's fascinating is we've gotten much more complex since then, but some of the basic things, for us, it's field, packaging, transit, and then our own personal travel. Those are the things that still hold. Some of our tools in 2009 we still use, and I'd recommend to anyone on this call, when you're done, just actually keep track of the flights you take and offset them, or have something to offset. It's bigger than you think, and it's a great baby step to get started. There's other things we tried that didn't work. We actually sent all of our farmers a spreadsheet and tried to ask them how much gas they used. That did not go very far, I think, but we found a lot of things that did, and learning and mistakes are kind of part of the journey. So that's how we got started with this. And I still have that first report from 2009 on what we thought our carbon impact was. So from there, we spent the first couple of years really starting to just learn and get our impact estimated. Around 2012, we really started to move that into action. So we became carbon neutral in 2012. We started finding partners that matched our values. And so we've worked a lot with Pure Projet since then. And we've done everything with them: offsets, insets. And so the idea between an inset and an offset is it's more in our sphere of influence. And so an inset would be something we do directly with our farmers in Peru or Ecuador. Conservation easements is another thing we've tried, actually working on rainforest that's already out there and making sure it stays preserved. We look at a lot of those things. We started looking at packaging a lot. Packaging is a huge part of, for us, our emissions. I think it's number 3. And so we started actually working towards compostable and recyclable packaging solutions. And so one of the things we launched about 5 years ago was a truffle wrapper that is actually made mostly out of tree bark. And what's interesting is when that first gets started, that's doesn't subtract from, that's not carbon positive for us. It actually has a longer supply chain, and we had to get all these things from different places. But you actually, sometimes when you're on the leading edge, you just need to take a lean in and try it, and know that as we get bigger in scale, we're going to be able to bring a lot of that production closer to home and reduce the carbon impact of that. So then we moved from there, and the last couple of years has really been around what I'd call era 3. And our big terms of climate positive, making it a regenerative system, trying to push new boundaries and eliminate some unknowns. And so one of the things I talked about is packaging. Okay, great. We want all of our packaging to be recyclable or compostable now, not just the truffle wrapper. And so working on projects to finish that this year. Other crazy thing is there's still a lot of numbers we just don't know. And there actually aren't a lot of good estimates for carbon impact of organic versus conventional cacao, which you'd think we would have solved already, but we haven't. And so we're actually working with a company called South Pole to actually create a good measurement metric for that, so we really understand what our baseline is. Other things we're working on is really creating a regenerative business. So our business processes and actions really link to our footprint, and then we understand that again in terms of how we make decisions in the future. And so one of the things I talk a lot about is forecasting. Forecasting is not a super sexy part of the business, but one of the things that made it really real for us a couple of years ago is we realized, geez, if we're out of stock on something, we might put it on an airplane. Well, there's a huge difference in carbon impact when you do that. If I take a gallon of fuel and put a pallet on an airplane, it moves that pallet about 4 miles. If I take a gallon of fuel in a tanker and a container ship, it moves that pallet about 600 miles. So there's a huge difference when our forecasting is not working as we grow. it not only impacts out of stocks, but it impacts our carbon. And so we're really trying to understand the circularity of that and how we can make that better. And I tell you, when you go to an employee meeting and we talk about forecast accuracy, people aren't super excited. But when you talk about that in terms of here's how much carbon we just wasted because we had to air freight something, you get a super different response. And then people see how it all links together. So, we're looking at business processes. We're looking at regenerative agriculture a lot as well. And so how do we go even deeper with our farmers to make sure all of their work regenerates the earth and actually improves their carbon footprint and the planet's carbon footprint? And what we're seeing from that is a lot of cacao is a monoculture, about 100 trees per acre. We're pioneering ways, and we've established a foundation on this to actually fund our farmers' transition to regenerative efforts. And by doing that, they plant about 15 trees per species per acre. It's about 900 trees per acre instead of 100. And there's huge benefits in carbon sequestration, but also for biodiversity on that plot of land, for farmer income, for farmer happiness, which I think is something people overlook, and like even broadening our definition now of what it means to be climate positive. We're seeing a ton of benefits from that. And that's something that now we're in a position to invest more in, and we're looking to make that a bigger and bolder part of our business going forward. So, there's learnings on this and sometimes mistakes every step of the way, but I would just encourage everyone to just get started. And it can be a super confusing thing, but one thing everybody can do is look at their calendar and see where they flew and actually add up the miles and try to offset that. So get started somewhere, just embrace the unknown, enjoy the journey. And you'll find friends on the way, and we'd love to be one of your friends. And if you need any help or thoughts on any of these projects, would love to talk more.
Amazing. Thanks so much. And I totally agree. I mean, I often tell people, because we're all in the business of wealth and health. Wealth. I wish I was in the business of wealth. Health is wealth, though. So we're all in the business of health, and I get asked that question all the time. It's like, how do you get started with your health? Well, for me, planetary health and the health of the earth is the same. You take one small step, drink more water in the case of being human, right? In the case of this, it's tracking your own plane travel, your own impact, and then going from there and reaching out and broadening your impact from there. And so it's a huge important thing. I could talk cacao with you for a while here. So just a couple follow-ups. I know we're getting short on time. I want to save some time for the audience questions, but I'll try to weave them in here because a couple have come through the chat and the Q&A, and one of them was around offsets. And I know, Caroline, you and I talked about this prior, and I loved it because you shared a similar skepticism to me when it came to offsets. When I first started hearing about this idea of offsets, it sounded like a bunch of bullshit. I was like, really? Can't we just do better? Why are we doing offsets? What? I don't understand that. And hearing you talk about it, feel like we were kindred spirits on that line of thinking when we first heard about it. But specific to the chat, as you're talking about the impact of offsets and what changed your mind, let us know if you have any recommendations in terms of offset programs, websites, different resources you've seen that kind of help change your mind.
Yeah, so you want me to jump in on that, Jeremiah?
Yes, please.
Okay, so the skepticism is well described. I always felt like offsets were just a great excuse for fossil fuel companies to feel better about what they were doing. For example, not to point any fingers or anything, but it all along, it felt like, how are we ever going to get ahead if we're sort of excusing the extraction and destruction methodology with a Band-Aid, right? That was sort of my mindset on it. And then all I had to do was hold up a mirror and recognize that if we're in the business of a consumer packaged good company, there's literally no way to be 100% net positive. I mean, I spoke to the beginnings of our company and it felt really ideal and like that there would be a way to do that. But as we scale and as we recognize the importance in our case of replacing chemical sunscreens that are ones that are healthy for the body and healthy for the planet, healthy for coral reefs, and with really pulling out toxins and putting in organic botanicals and offering an option and a solution for people, there's a constant process of design, and there's a need for design in this case there's a need to redesign the delivery of products. And I don't just mean transportation. I mean literally how we take something and put it on our body. How we get something that has this incredible ingredients inside of it, and then what you put around it and how you get that onto your body. The most simple concept of design. So shy of that, which will be great when we have total paradigm shift and everything is groovy and, you know, full circular economy with regeneration built into it, we have to take responsibility for the fact that we're not net positive from an impact perspective. And where the change came for me in the story that I shared with you earlier was that with this skepticism, I was so honored to be invited to lead a panel discussion at a 1% for the Planet gathering in Portland, Oregon 2 years ago. And one of my panelists was Peter Daring, who was the founder of Climate Neutral. His company, Peak Designs, he recognized the importance of creating a system around measuring, reducing and offsetting carbon. So he started Climate Neutral. Climate Neutral is our partner for using the tool of measuring, reducing, and offsetting, and then a stamp to verify. And so I literally asked him on that panel, like, dude, it's total BS. Why are we doing this? Why are we just allowing all of these extractive practices to happen, emissions practices to happen, so we can just throw a Band-Aid? And he said very clearly, it's a mathematical equation. It's so simple. It's not that we're trying to promote the acceleration of the emissions. Reduction is very purposely put in the middle part of the process there. That is very important. Reduction is the focus, because when you have a financial accountability, because offsets ultimately are a price tag, right? That's what we do. We pay money to offset the carbon. With that price tag, we're actually inspired to reduce the impact. So I give it to Peter Daring for convincing me that there's a step along the way, and this is the step along the way. It's by no means complete, and it's by no means meant to actually even celebrate the idea of it. It's more recognizing the importance of it. I would love to share one other quick story, echoing on Mike's, both your importance of measuring air travel and the forecasting piece. We've always been very methodical, trying to forecast as much as possible, stay within that, sourcing all of our packaging domestically, because we recognize the travel is a big piece of it. So our biggest aha in our measurements in 2020 is that one of the scope 3 sections is upstream transportation and distribution, which means getting our components to where they get processed. That took up 10% of our greenhouse gas emissions. And it was very specifically all the transportation. It was made up of 600 different shipments in 2020 to get all of our components and things to the place where they're going to get processed, whether it's here or other locations. Of those 600 shipments, 14 of them were responsible for 60% of the emissions in that category. And those 14 were very specifically in the beginning of COVID, when people were demanding our product immediately, and we had to overnight airship those products. So ultimately, when you string the math along, 14 air shipments were responsible for 5% of our overall emissions. So I just want to share that. And there's the only thing I can do is offset that, right? Because there's no going back and changing what we did. So.
Yeah.
Totally.
So well said, Caroline. Can I speak on that a little bit, Jeremiah?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah. I think that gets back to this idea that you had highlighted initially, Caroline, of just the importance of measuring and really understanding, because we have so many assumptions, and the world is complex, whether it's like our internal, home, what's our personal impact. Then you try to think about your business, it is very complex. Agriculture itself is very complex. There's no kind of one answer, reductionist, linear way to capture all of this. And it is like a budget. You've got to think about it like your carbon budget. And if you don't know, where you're spending your carbon, then how do you know which action to take to actually, start to rein that in? And if nothing else, please take away from this panel that, be curious, go do that calculation, measure, find out, figure out where your carbon is going and coming and what your budget is, right? Because then you'll know which actions are most important. And you might find that they're easier than you thought to get some of that low-hanging fruit that's actually going to have a measurable impact on your carbon, right? And that's something you can celebrate with your employees, with your consumers, and also help start educate our public discourse around those impacts, you know, because we need brands also talking about what they're doing and elevating awareness around this.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, well said. And I mean, I think I have a favorite saying, which is don't let the perfect get in the way of the good. And, you know, making the impact and you both touched on it, like reduction is a key part of this equation. And I think that's often glossed over because people say, I want to go from, you know, problem to solution with no middle ground. And sometimes it's just as simple as taking those steps to reduce. And it's something I know at Thrive Market and with all of our brands that we're talking to, it's the first thing we ask, right? It's like, what can we reduce together? How do we reduce the impact first? And then we'll long-term work on solutions. And I wanted to throw one more question out because I know we're running out of time, but Mike said one of my favorite words, and it's something that I probably say 20 times a day these days, which is regenerate and regenerative, and just the importance of the impact of agriculture and that mindset that we're all also trying to do as we're looking at all the other inputs. So I'd love for you to just talk to us about how you all are looking at regenerative supply chains and the impact that that's had and how that's become part of Alter Eco's ethos, if you will.
Cool. Yeah. You know, one of the things I think that we're seeing that is probably even a shift in thinking since 2009 when we started this is, you know, one, just measuring everything starts to create a broader awareness of the process and how to fix things and realizing, wow, there's actually a lot more happening at the farm than we thought. The other is that I think, you know, we've even broadened how we think about climate. And I think, you know, climate change in the planet, but also inequality are the two biggest challenges of our time. And I think they're the two things we must fix in the 21st century. What we love about regenerative is we think it's going to help both of these things. Because if you think about your average cacao farmer, you know, nobody is pushing for their kids to become cacao farmers when they grow up because it's a hard way to make a living. And what's really cool about regenerative is by planting all these different species back into the forest, where it used to be a cacao monoculture, it not only improves the quality of the cacao and sequesters carbon and does all those things, but it actually gives the farmer more tools. And I'll give a couple of examples, like the first row, the first level, if you guys are familiar with regenerative, it's basically layers of strata of plants, and it looks like a forest. And that first is row crops like pigeon peas or peppers. You know, that's something the farmer uses for their own table, and they eat it as a family. It improves their nutritional profile. Then there's the cacao. You know, they work with Alter Eco on that, and we pay a premium for that, and it's higher quality. The next thing they grow in the next layer is mangoes and bananas. That doesn't go to Alter Eco, but they can eat that themselves. They sell that at market. They export to other folks. And so suddenly what you're seeing, and I think we're really learning, like looking at it from the farmer's point of view. And yes, regenerative benefits the planet, which is great because it sequesters carbon and increases biodiversity, but it also helps the farmer because they've got a ton of different things to eat and to sell and to improve their own livelihood. And then if you think about a farm, like that field is the farmer's office, just like we all have our own offices and you get a new chair or something like that, and it improves your happiness in the office. If you're a farmer, we're replacing that monoculture, which is honestly like the sun's beaten down all the time, pretty rough place to be, with a beautiful forest with birds going through and different types of crops and its own rhythm. It's just a better place to work. And that's why I'm really excited to see farmers are happier when they do regenerative, and they make more money, and it helps the planet. And I think, you know, is what started with in 2009, just a little bit of measurement, like, man, I wonder how much carbon is happening in the field level. Now it's moving to like a better system that's going to help the planet and help the farmers. And so we're really excited to double down on that in the next few years.
I love that. I love the office environment analogy. I think that's really fun, and it's so true. If you've I've been fortunate to travel to many farms, and you just see the stark contrast of what that life looks like and what that livelihood looks like, and it's pretty amazing. I I know we had a couple questions from the audience, one of which, Jane, I would love for you to take, because you brought it up, which is the concept of insetting. And could you just explain what that means and give people the quick download on that?
Yeah. So insetting is the idea that you can create the sequestration opportunities within your own supply chain. So that might be, at the farm, planting an additional, tree cover, or changing your soil management practices so that, you're enhancing sequestration. Or it may be, finding, like, within the overall hectarage of the farm, looking for opportunities to actually, increase riparian habitat and plant out, unused land, right? So it's really looking for that additionality within your supply chain, where you're doing, and additionality is kind of a wonky offsetting, insetting word, where it's basically you have to define that whatever action it is that's sequestering the carbon is something that that's happening in addition to normal everyday practices, right? So you can't, like, just go in and say, well, this is in our case, tea is grown with shade, but we couldn't claim the carbon from those shade trees on the tea farm because they're not additional to what's already happening on the farm. So when you look at insetting, you're looking for additional activities, kind of above and beyond your normal farming practices, or normal land management practices, that are going to enhance the capacity and actual sequestration of carbon on that land.
That's awesome. That's a great explanation too. One other question, I think we kind of touched on a little bit earlier, but just reading into the spirit of the question, on a personal level, I know, Mike, you brought up just tracking your own personal travel and your own personal impact. Maybe you can take a stab at it, but then I'd love to hear from the other panelists too, if there's any offset programs, anything that you're fond of, or things you look at on a personal level to offset that you're invested in or participate in.
One of the things we're doing for Earth Month as a company is a Check Your Eco Challenge. And if you go to our Instagram feed or website, you'll see this. And it's just a really cool tool that puts it in, and I'd love the term, they say, like, if everyone lived like you, we would need this many Earths to provide all those resources. And it's honestly a pretty, you can argue if the assumptions are blah, but it's a really super interesting tool to see it that way and say, wow, if everyone else was like me, here's what this would look like. So I've done this, a couple other employees are doing it. We're going to make it public at the end of the month. My results need some improvement, I'm not going to lie, but again, I think that's part of the journey that we're on here, is to see these things and recognize it, and again, try to get better. So I saw that number and I'm like, shoot, we really need to move forward and getting solar in our house. Like, that needs to happen now. And so started making phone calls, and I think everyone hopefully will take that and kind of get their own aha moment of a couple things they can do.
Nice. And subsequently, you're going on a hike this afternoon, not jetting to the Riviera for my vacation. But Jane, Caroline?
Yeah, I'll add on to that one, which is, I love that, Mike. That's really cool that you guys are doing that. I also appreciate that I think there are a lot of very simple steps just from an educational perspective that people can take. One thing we didn't really talk about was scope 2, which is all the things that come and go from a headquarters, namely electricity, how you're getting your power. And for us, our scope 2 is 0. And the reason why our scope 2 is 0 is because that we are fortunate enough on the Central Coast to have been able to opt into Central Coast Community Energy, which is an alternative to PG&E that is completely dedicated to renewable resources from a power perspective. So, and then within Central Coast Community Energy, there's an opportunity to opt into renewables only. So we essentially are getting all of our power from solar and wind. And I think that's a good move, is just to learn about what other resources are available for people locally. And then the other thing I'll say, kind of adding on to Jane's insetting, is that we have a farm and we grow the raw materials for some of our products. We grow calendula and lavender, yarrow on our farm. And we were given the opportunity to work with a local resource conservation district through a grant from Patagonia to actually do a carbon farm plan. So we're looking at the most optimal amount of carbon that we can sequester per acre. And our goal in 2 years from now is to be able to basically inset all of our emissions. So we're going to be able to sequester all of the carbon emissions within our own farm by doing the things that Jane's talking about, like things that we wouldn't have necessarily thought of: riparian restoration, native species restoration, increased biodiversity, increased mulching, biodiversity in the soil from microbes. And that also offers us an opportunity to educate and coordinate more within our own community on local solutions. So I think that's another thing personally people can do, is just kind of look around.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And I know, just back to your scope 2.2, we, like everyone this past year, our commuter emissions, which is something we calculate at Thrive, went down over 90% with everyone working from home. So on our side, we leaned into that and downsized our office. We cut our office to the third of the size it was, and we made that part of our culture, in terms of, hey, like, let's make sure we're not contributing more carbon when we've got hundreds of people driving to one headquarters in LA, Los Angeles, which is one of the worst places for carbon emissions. So it's something that we can just think about and think outside the proverbial box to impact. So Jane, you have other ideas or thoughts, resources?
The main thing for me is, like, when I started looking at this personally in my own life, with like plane travel, it's really affected, my choices, our choices as a family for vacation, and, really, widen the lens of what's important for us. And it's, I've been experimenting with how to talk to friends and family about it too. I think that's part of it, is how do we kind of spread the word? And, my friends and family may choose organic and they may choose a low meat diet. But, how do we bring that, that airline travel piece into it? We all still want to fly to some great vacation somewhere. So I think with the pandemic, it's opened opportunities to lean into that conversation a little bit more, and start to kind of experiment with how to do it in a non-threatening way with the people I love. So that's, for me, has been like one of the biggest ahas in this journey for my personal life.
Awesome. Yeah, no, it's again, back to the point, it doesn't have to be a massive seismic change that you make in your everyday life. It's really just stepping back and assessing what is going on and making choices that are somewhat simple in the moment, but have this reverberating effect, and can really change the world if enough of us do it and we're all aligned and going in the same direction. So
if we can get Elon on the airplane design, that would help too, right?
Yeah, right. Well, I will say on that note, I mean, I can't disagree with what you just said. I will say, to Jane's point, like, rethinking, I mean, we've rethought it as a family too, and just thinking about, like, why weren't we taking more road trips? Why were we thinking about where we could go in the world or what we would do next, and making that, a big shiny object versus where can we drive to? Like, what can we do, more locally, or what can we even do at home? Or, and we also, fortunately learned we kind of enjoyed each other's company with less inputs, and that's a fortunate place to be. And less is more, really, truly. So I know we're just about at time. I think we've covered off the questions we received, and just wanted to appreciate this panel. I mean, I learned so much from you all on this call and on the chats. I feel really lucky, like kind of spoiled that I got like extra conversations with you all about these topics, and made a bunch of notes on things that we're going to do. So I'm hoping that everyone else who joined this Zoom had the same experience. And thanks for taking time out of your super busy days, and in Mike's case, vacation, to join us and talk about this crucial topic. And I'll turn it over to Kat to close us out.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. This was such an incredible conversation and so much insight. And what I really enjoyed was that it's personal and actionable, and it feels doable, which is, part of the reason why we wanted to put this panel together. So before we all go, I'd love to get some feedback from the audience through the form that Sarah and my team will drop in the chat. It'll only take a second to fill out, and you'll be helping us get better at events like this one. And I hope our audience feels inspired to start the process of measuring and being curious about their carbon baseline. Mike, thanks for sharing your personal assessment. I feel inspired to do more to understand my own carbon footprint. We have also been talking about adding solar to our home. And I also kind of want to even go back in the last year or two, count up how many flights and maybe try to do something about that. I used to be on a lot of planes, but thank you so much, Jeremiah, for moderating. I know that you said this was your first moderator gig, but you did great.
Oh, thanks.
Jane, Mike, and Caroline, thanks for sharing your time and experience. And I really appreciate everyone's questions as well. And if you enjoyed this panel as part of Earth Week, Naturally San Diego is hosting an event called Cooking Sustainably and Reducing Food Waste with Chef Maria at the end of the day tomorrow. That should be a fun event. And you can RSVP to that by heading to the link that I'm going to drop in the chat right now. And thanks so much. And, have a great day. I just so appreciate all the time that you have spent with us.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thanks. Have a great vacation, Mike.
Thanks,
Bye.
you guys. So much fun. Take care,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye. Thank you.